This is Kerplunk. It was originally produced by Ideal in 1967 and was invented by Eddy Goldfarb and Rene Soriano. It's a game of skill where players take turns removing these thin plastic sticks from their spaces in this plastic tube. The sticks are balancing these glass marbles on top. When the players pull too many sticks, the glass marbles will fall down below and land into their numbered tray. The object of the game is to be the player with the least amount of marbles after the last one has dropped. This is a lot of fun. It's actually genius in its simplicity, and I thought it would be really neat to compare this original 1967 edition of Kerplunk to this current 2021 edition from Mattel and see what's changed and what stayed the same over the course of about 60 years. Let's dive right in, starting with the box on the 1967 Ideal edition of Kerplunk. Right away, this thing is very eye-catching. I absolutely love the titling on this, the giant Kerplunk. That's so great. The cartoon hand is really simplistic. It kind of gives you just a basic idea of the game visually without getting too complicated. When we flip it over, the back is blank white, and this is a two-piece lift-off top box. It has the instructions printed on the underside of the lid, which I have such a soft spot for. And then also, this had an amazing presentation when you first unboxed it. There's a small organizer inside that'll hold the box for your marbles, the catch tray for the marbles, and the cylinder for the game, as well as a little area where the sticks can be bound to this cardboard backer. It's all very attractive, and I gotta say, this is not the first game from Ideal during this era of production that I've reviewed that has had an amazing box insert. I mean, Buckaroo was awesome. So, and Challenge the Chief as well. So they have a good track record of really nice box inserts with their games. Now let's take a look at the 2021 edition of Kerplunk from Mattel. So this was the most recent one that I could get my hands on. I bought it right off the store shelf here in 2025, and it didn't look like there were any other more recent editions available at the store. So I believe this will be our best comparison. And right away, the box art is eye-catching. It's very bright with this nice bright green here. A nice cartoon representation of what the actual game is like. So no misleading there. And Kerplunk at this stage in the game is a pretty iconic game. So we know what we're getting into when we're picking this one up. Now, contrary to the Ideal edition, when you flip this one over, there's a nice picture of some kids enjoying the game and your basic standard fare for board game boxes. You have some close-ups of the game elements and a little blurb of what the gameplay is going to be like. Now, this is a single-piece box made of a relatively flimsy tag board, and the top flips open for storage. There's no organizer inside, so a lot of these pieces are going to be sitting loose, and one of my complaints is that right away, with these flip-top boxes, you always have a pretty sizable gap where little parts can walk away through. So you're going to want to make sure that you get yourself a Ziploc bag for the marbles and for the sticks at the very least, because there was nothing really provided. They came in plastic bags, but they certainly weren't resealable. I like to try to repurpose what comes in games, but it did not look like they would be usable enough to keep everything safe. So I gotta say that the box art is very attractive for 2021, but this loses out in the long run when you compare it to this gorgeous 1967 edition's box from Ideal. Now let's get to the games themselves. I'd like to start with the 1967 edition from Ideal. Now, this is interesting. I actually thought that this coloration of this cylinder was yellow because of ambering, which naturally happens with a number of different types of plastic. But as it turns out, these came this way. So even though the art makes it look significantly more clear, a lot of the original editions of Kerplunk had this yellow plastic, and then also the catch tray, the plastic on the catch tray is blue, as well as this centerpiece that all the little skewers are pushed through. Now these sticks, and I've seen them referred to online as straws as well, They're not pointy, though they look relatively pointy, and they have a decent amount of flex. In the 1967 edition, you get red and yellow for your colors, which is fine. You don't need a huge variety here. And the marbles were nice, you know, pretty traditional little cat's eye marbles of various different colors, all glass. Later on with Kerplunk, they did start adding a gold marble. This edition is a little too early, but in some editions, there was a gold marble that people could treat as a plus or minus 5, which was kind of neat. So you may see some editions that have an odd marble out. Anyway, the rules of the game are pretty simple. What happens is each one of these 4 trays on the bottom is numbered, and in the 1967 edition, the numbers are painted on there. This cylinder has a hole in top for you to drop the marbles in. And as you can see, all these little skewers are poked through these little holes here, and they create sort of a lattice that supports these marbles. Each player will start their turn by rotating the cylinder so that this bottom ejection door faces their respective little, I guess, cubby or whatever catch tray that's numbered for that player, and they will pull one of these sticks out. Now, according to the rules, pretty much as soon as you've committed your hand to touching the cylinder and touched one of these sticks, you're committed to pulling that one that you touched. So you better be cautious and make sure that you're eyeing this up carefully. Now, if you pull one of these skewers and a marble falls down the chute and makes the wonderful sound that is the game's namesake, Kerplunk, you get to keep that marble, and that becomes part of your score. So at the end of the game, when all of the marbles have dropped through the lattice into each player's respective dish, you tally up, and the player with the fewest marbles wins. So it's a very simplistic game of skill. I will say, oddly enough, one of the more challenging parts is getting all of the skewers fed through the cylinder before the game. So I thought that was amusing that just setting it up takes almost as long as playing the game in some instances. I think the first time I set this one up, I was so nervous with the 67 edition because these are flexible, but when you have something this old with this plastic, I was really worried it would be brittle and would break. So I was being extra cautious while assembling this for play the first time. That being said, the construction has held up. It's very sturdy. There's a tiny little crack I see down at the bottom here, but when you think about the fact that glass marbles have been dropping and pummeling the base of this plastic for the lifetime of the game, a small chip or crack is really nothing that's too concerning to me. All of the plastic is very sturdy and thick. There's almost no flex here. You really have to squeeze to get any flex out of the cylinder. The tray has a little bit, but not much. So everything feels very sturdy. Another thing that I like is the way that this sits in the tray. Part of the gameplay dynamic is to rotate this cylinder from player to player, and the rotation is exceptionally smooth in the 1967 edition. So all around, the fit and the finish for the game, excellent. Also, one thing that I did like is when you open this game up, their storage solution was that cardboard backer that's included that has a small pocket for you to use to place this box, which they provide for your Kerplunk marbles. So Ideal gave you a box for your marbles and a little space in the organizer to keep the box from rolling around inside the greater game box. It secures this little cylinder here for gameplay, and there is a spot where these skewers can be bundled with some small rubber binders. In fact, when I got this edition, we found that one of the original rubber binders from 1967 was still in the box, but it was very brittle and did end up crumbling quite easily. But it was kind of neat to see what size. We were able to get the exact size for replication, so that was kind of neat. So storage-wise, it's probably, I would say I would credit a certain amount of this game's longevity to how well the game box manages to store it and keep all the parts from both getting lost and shaking around inside the box enough to damage each other. So excellent quality for the 1967 edition from Ideal. So awesome game there. Now, got a little bit of little bit of dust. Little bit of dust. Oh, there we are. I don't want to put the game away dirty. So, very nice game from Ideal here. Kerplunk has definitely held up and stood the test of time. Let's have a look and see what has changed and what stayed the same in the 2021 edition from Mattel. Now, right away, we can see that there are some color differences with the plastic, and I actually really like this more uniform blue color. It makes the whole thing look clean. Not that there's anything wrong with the yellow, but like I said, my gut reaction when I saw this was that this had ambered over time with age, as is common with a lot of clear plastics. But this one, no, this actually looks quite nice with this blue tint. I will note right away that the plastic feels quite a bit thinner. There's at least a lot more flex, definitely with the base tray and the cylinder. Another thing is you'll notice that we now have 3 colors of the sticks, and they don't appear to be as thick, but they also don't appear to be as pointy. Not that these were sharp in any way, but there was a bit of a taper on the end of the older ones, and I think that was to help guide them through each other. Instead, these are a bit more blunted and round. So even though these are less of a danger of hurting anybody, these are significantly safer. But other than that, they are very bendy and flexy, which is nice. It made setup relatively easy. Again, what you're doing is threading these through these little holes here in the cylinder so that you can eventually pull them back out on your turn. And yes, it still is a bit of a challenge. There's no, I mean, when you compare these directly, I don't see a huge change in the actual size of the holes that these skewers are going through, or that the little sticks are going through. The shape of the cylinder seems largely the same. The dimensions of the game seem largely the same. So it presented all of the same issues when you were setting up the game as far as difficulty getting the skewers in place. But that being said, because they didn't deviate, I mean, it played largely the same. Now, one of my biggest complaints, however, I have 2 complaints. Kerplunk can survive with lighter weight plastic, so I don't really consider it a huge complaint to say they used less material when, frankly, that did not affect my feel for the actual gameplay itself. In fact, I dare say that the lighter weight plastic gave a more satisfying kerplunk sound when the marble struck it, as opposed to the sharper tap that the thicker plastic gave. So that was kind of a boon. However, one thing that I don't like is on the bottom of this cylinder, ooh, a few skewers fell out there. At the bottom of this cylinder, unlike the 67 edition, there's a little bit of a round step that comes out on the bottom, similar to like what you might get on the bottom of a drinking cup. And there is a cutout in the bottom of this tray that's round, and the tolerance between that little step and that hole is so tight that it almost snaps in like a Lego. And so the issue is if it doesn't snap in and then rotate freely, it just sort of snugs in there. Well, a dynamic of the game is rotating this cylinder, and that extra bit of friction, it doesn't add any stability either, since it doesn't fit correctly. Since it doesn't fit too tight, it's always kind of rocking and popping out just a little bit. Oh, I hate that sound too. But also, if you do kind of snug it in there, then when you have to turn it for your turn, you really got to put in some extra effort, and it's jerky. And part of the game is when you're rotating this cylinder for your turn, if any marbles fall when you're making that move, those count towards your score. So you really want the game, the construction of this game, to be stable and to move smoothly. And you can hear the plastic rubbing when I'm trying to do that. I mean, this is just off its own weight, just without me even pushing very hard on it. So I will say that I don't mind the reduction in the amount of plastic in the actual heavy plastic component parts, because I don't think that these parts warrant an overuse of plastic. They're plenty sturdy. The game does not require a whole lot. It's simple at its core. But what I will say is, whoever decided to engineer this portion, the tolerances are way off. If this little section of the tray was opened a bit more and it rotated smoothly, I wouldn't have any trouble. But because they decided to cut those tolerances so tight and now it doesn't fit, it very much adversely affects the game. So I'm surprised to see that, well, like I said, they hit the mark in so many regards. There's no loss of quality with the glass marbles. I would say that they're arguably the same, if not actually clearer and more variety of color. The quality of glass is quite nice. Fewer bubbles in these than what I got with the Ideal packs, which structurally means that these will be more sound and less likely to crack over time. The sticks are quite nice. I like that they're flexy. As you saw, one of the downfalls of them having a narrower gauge, considering that the holes seem to even be about the same size, at least visually, as what they are in the cylinder that the 67 Kerplunk has, the skewers being thinner, as you saw when I just simply tipped it. Some of the ones that were lower down and not held by pressure from the marbles had slid right out. So I had lost just a couple of them there. So that's not really the case with the 1967 edition. I'm trying not to make a ton of extra noise. I mean, there are some that are looser than others, but yeah, almost all this, the actual tolerance is enough on the skewer. So it's interesting. I guess the best way to look at this is the 1967 edition has a much tighter tolerance on these skewers, and everything else seems to be a bit more forgiving, making the game smoother to play as far as transitioning turns, but more challenging to play when it comes to removing the little sticks, whereas the newer version, because of the tolerance being out of whack, moving from player to player is more challenging, whereas removing these sticks there's very little friction holding them in place. So I'm surprised at what shortcomings I see here. But before we get too far into this, let's get to the rule books and get that out of the way. So, as I said before, the rules on the 1967 Kerplunk game are printed on the underside of the game box, which is always a great move. That's always something that I love to see in games because it's very difficult to destroy the rules in that regard, and you're not going to lose them. Obviously, they stood the test of time. The rules for Kerplunk did not get lost because they were part of the box. So almost 60 years, boom, they're right there. Now we go to the 2021 edition, and we have this little paper fold out, which actually, the rules are so simple to this game. We've got English and French here, and no space is wasted. That's straight to the point, tells you how to play the game. The only thing is it's very thin paper. So my only detractor, this doesn't have corner folds. It's not folded into quarters. It's just folded in half. It's unsealed, just regular white bond paper, black and white print. So this has every indicator of standing the test of time, save for the fact that it's super thin. And again, like I said, it's nice that they were able to make use of space and they're not wasting anything, but it's a simple game. However, that being said, again, a lift-off top box for more secure storage of the small parts, and printing the instructions on the underside of the lid would have really elevated the 2021 edition. So I'm wondering what the cost difference between package options would have been to make this more enticing. But again, they both have reasonable rules as far as what's written down. It's easy to follow. None of them are overly complicated as far as how they're written. But I'm going to go ahead and say that the 1967 Kerplunk wins for having the rules printed on the underside of the lid of the box. Hey, I'm partial. What can I say? It pleases the couch. Now, overall, when we're comparing these games, let's talk about quality. Is it worth getting a vintage copy of Kerplunk versus going with a new copy of Kerplunk? Base gameplay, there's no reason to really avoid this, save for, I mean, that tolerance really bugs me. I'm not going to lie. Like, everything else is so similar. But I will say that I am a little bothered by the tolerance of that tray fitting into the cylinder up here, and that really does affect how the game plays. Other than that, as you can see, these are so close to each other as far as built to spec that no, I don't really see any other reason why I would go off. And honestly, Worst case scenario, you just rotate the whole board. There's no saying that you actually have to leave the marbles in there to count them at the end of the game. You can certainly just fish out your marbles whenever you've dropped some down and rotate without having to worry about actually turning this cylinder within the tray. So it's not the end of the world. And when you're dealing with Kerplunk, this isn't exactly the most expensive game out there. So there's only so much complaint that you can have with a little bit of lack of fit and finish. So overall, though, the game is a lot of fun. The nice thing about Kerplunk is right away, it's like I said, it's a very recognizable game. At this stage in pop culture, we've seen Kerplunk around enough that you pop this open, pretty much everybody's familiar. Teaching somebody how to play is nothing. It's like an affair of a couple minutes. And overall, it's that extra excitement of having, like I said, I like 3D games, I like puzzle games, I like skill games, anything that's tactile like this, that involves a little bit of concentration. These kind of things are very attractive for getting pickup games. So I always recommend games like Kerplunk, and I highly recommend Kerplunk itself. So I don't think you could go wrong going with an old edition of Kerplunk or a new edition. Personally, I do prefer the build quality of the 67, and the packaging of the 67 is insane. So as a collector's item, I will say the ideal version of Kerplunk is really neat and definitely worth taking a look. And again, like I said before, this is not a hyper rare or hyper valuable game, but it is certainly a recognizable game. It's culturally significant. A lot of people have grown up with Kerplunk in their game closet, so this is something that always brings warm feelings to the game table. But I wouldn't shy away from recommending a new version of the game either. The fit and finish issues are not game breaking, and the changes that they've made over the years, it's not anything that I'm too concerned with. Did they cut down on plastic use? Yes. Is that more environmentally sound? Yeah, so that's fair. However, would I appreciate a little bit better attention to some of these tolerances? Well, yeah, because I mean, what's the point of avoiding plastic use if the product that you produce is of lesser grade because of it? Because that just in itself becomes a whole bit of waste. But I certainly wouldn't call this waste. I still think that this is a well-made game. I still think it's worth the purchase price, and I still think it's worth having available for game night. So now's the part where I ask you, hey, Kerplunk, do you have fond memories of this game? Is this a new one for you? What do you think of the differences from 1967 till today? Comment below, let me know. Thanks for joining me, and I'll see you next time.